Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second session of Credo InfoLit Learning Community. We have a great session for you today. Again, my name is Sarah Lustig, and I will be here help facilitating in the background. Come and join us in the chat. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us there. I want to welcome everyone to today's session. We have a series of guest speakers, and today is our second session, which is really exciting. But before we officially begin with our special guest speakers, I would just like to introduce you to Henrietta Verma. She is from Credo, and she is here to tell us a little bit about this session. So I'm going to pop off camera.
Great, thank you, Sarah. My name is Edda Verma, as Sarah said. I work with Credo's customer success team. Thank you all for joining us today. I see people from all over the country, so that's really exciting. I'm in New York City myself. Hello from snowy New York. So today I'd like to welcome two speakers. They are Dave Harmeyer, who's Associate Dean of the University Libraries at Azusa Pacific University in Southern California. Lucky them. And his co-presenter is Janice Baskin, who is a retired professor of English at the same university. Dave and Janice have a new book out. Congratulations to them on that publication.
Thank you.
You're welcome. The book is with Rowman and Littlefield publishers, and it's called Implementing the Information Literacy Framework, a Practical Guide for Librarians. We often hear at Credo from our librarian customers that bringing faculty on board with the information literacy process can be sometimes a little bit of an uphill battle. So Dave and Janice are going to talk today about how you can do that most effectively, and they're going to particularly concentrate on how you can collaborate with faculty to do IL work. So I just want to remind you that in about 15 minutes before the end of today's presentation, we will have time for a Q&A. So please do store up your questions for Dave and Janice at the end, and we'll tackle them then. So now it is time to hear from our co-presenters. Take it away.
All right. Henrietta, thank you so much for that introduction. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And hello to everybody out there in the United States, maybe abroad. And thank you for taking some of your busy schedule and watching this webinar for the next hour, or for those of you who are watching it streamed later. As Henrietta was sharing, I've been a library faculty member at Azusa Pacific University for over 20 years. I'm currently the Associate Dean of the University Libraries. My rank is full professor, and I chair the Campus Information Literacy Committee. My master's in library science is from UCLA in 1993, and in 2007 I finished a doctorate in educational technology from Pepperdine University. Janice and I have known each other as faculty colleagues for over 10 years. We started working on the book back in January of 2014, and we just finished it here in January of 2018, a 4-year journey. I did a book previously with Rowman and Littlefield, published in 2014, and on the topic of the reference interview. And then came an opportunity to write one of the books in Rowman and Littlefield's Practical Guides for Librarians series. Ours is the 40th in that series. I chose to write about information literacy because at the time, late 2013, new standards were being discussed in a special committee commissioned by the Association of College and Research Libraries, which many of you know as ACRL, to supplement the older 2000 standards. Here's what the front cover of the book looks like.
Change the slide.
At the bottom, here we go. At the bottom of the screen of this slide is a URL that you can go to print out an order form for the book, Roman and Littlefield is providing a 30% discount for those attending today's webinar. Thank you to Roman and Littlefield for doing that. So let's get started. Janice?
Thanks, Dave. All right, to continue on the webinar, by the summer of 2016, the new standards for information literacy, or IL as we're going to call it here, had become the framework for the information literacy for higher education. Its 6 core concepts, or frames, had replaced the previous 5 standards. In addition, ACRL voted to rescind the standards. Now, that doesn't mean they disappeared, simply means that the website is no longer supporting the standards with their materials. In fact, it's pretty easy to see the standards within the new information literacy framework, since the framework ideas have evolved from the earlier work. But make no mistake, there has been a big shift. Excuse me, I gotta get a sip of water. While the standards were a practical set of skills to be taught, the IL frames are conceptual. They are aimed at creating a set of intellectual skills or habits of mind that students will practice all their lives as consumers, as citizens, and in personal fulfillment. The framework concepts reflect the reality that information literacy is a core competency in education and is taught by educators, not simply libraries and librarians. So to successfully teach information literacy, as imagined by ACRL, requires a change in the way information literacy had previously been taught. According to ACRL, information literacy instruction must now be taught explicitly in the classroom. It needs to be integrated within the general education curriculum and embedded in assignments and course instruction for every relevant course. And our book is about how to do that. As our description of this webinar states, in our time today, we're going to pull out 6 key questions that need to be asked when creating a framework-based information literacy instruction program. In an hour's time, we cannot be comprehensive, but with each question, we'll share some thoughts and suggestions to give you some change points as you move forward in your work with these new IL concepts. I will be taking the first 3 questions, as you see on the screen right now. And then Dave will talk about the next 3, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. But before we get started, let's take a short 1-sentence poll to get a feel of where we're at right now, and Dave is going to lead us in that activity.
Right, okay, thank you, Janice. As we get started, why don't we begin by finding out where we are all at in regards to the framework. So right now, go ahead and click one of the 4 buttons that are on your screen there, and we'll find out how we fare in terms of understanding or have a knowledge of the information literacy framework for higher education. Oh, I see we have quite a few, 31, who maybe could lead this seminar. Yeah, that's right. Not too many who have no understanding at all. And about a third of us, I guess, are sort of, well, I'm familiar with it. I've heard the words, the framework. I'm not sure exactly what that all entails, but a good number of you, 2/3 of you, really are know some amount of in-depthness to the framework, and that's great. I'm happy for that. I think our profession would be, encouraged to see where we're at, a couple of years into this new standard called the framework. Okay, great, thank you. All right, so knowing a little bit about that, let's go ahead and get started with our first question that Janice will take it from this point. Okay, Janice, go ahead.
All right. First question, how are you collaborating with classroom faculty so that students are engaging in information literacy experiences in their classrooms? The 2 key words we want you to focus on in this question are collaboration and classroom. For the new framework to be successfully implemented, there needs to be successful collaboration between librarians and classroom instructors, librarians and department heads and program directors, librarians and administrators, really anyone who is involved in curriculum, assessment, creating courses, doing faculty development. That's a lot of people. But while the people may change a bit, the process really doesn't. It's about collaboration, or as we call it in our book, co-equal collaboration. It's kind of a redundant term, but we use it because we want to emphasize that with the framework, no one group or person owns IL instruction, and no one person or group is really in charge. It is not a doctor-patient kind of relationship, it's a doctor-doctor relationship. The second fact we want to emphasize is that ACRL built the framework to be used in the classroom, whether the classroom is biology, English, music, math. This means that the librarian is stepping into someone else's territory, a teacher's classroom, and to paraphrase Han Solo in Star Wars, let the Wookiee win. By Wookiee, I mean the classroom teacher, and I mean it in the nicest possible way. That is, let them think that IL is their idea. Because in some ways it is, particularly in the humanities. Many of the concepts in the framework are ideas that have a long tradition in the liberal arts. To an educator, part of becoming educated is to become information literate. In education today, IL has been identified as a core competency, along with others such as critical thinking and analytical reasoning and effective oral and written communication. So when you approach classroom faculty with the concepts in the framework, you may be surprised to find they are very familiar with the ideas, just not the terminology. And they can be very territorial about these ideas because, after all, from their perspective, that's what they're already teaching. But thankfully, today educators are all about collaboration. It's very much a best practice today. Educators now form professional learning communities, communities of practice. In my field, which is rhetoric, we call them discourse communities. We come together to share and learn from each other, create new strategies and new knowledge for teaching and learning. And as some of you already know from our poll, these are ideas that are present in the framework. So you go into a collaboration with an expectation to learn from your fellow collaborators, to integrate what you know with what they know, and to create a model or a strategy for IL instruction that is tailored according to your fellow collaborators' teaching goals for that course. These goals are expressed in student learning outcomes. Some of you who teach courses know that student learning outcomes are what drives teaching in the classroom today. Everything that happens in a classroom is linked to a learning outcome. And the outcomes are mapped to assignments. So to embed IL, to create IL experiences in the classroom, it has to be integrated with these outcomes. There is no other way the classroom teacher will approach it. You need to work with them to help create or adapt assignments that have explicit IL elements, but you can't tell them and you probably can't show them. It has to be a collaboration. Now, collaboration can be tricky. It is not a natural process. People easily get defensive, and there is a strong desire to avoid conflict, even though conflict is a natural and essential part of collaboration. There are some keys to successful collaboration, which I'll quickly cover to end this discussion on our first question. The first one I've already mentioned. In a collaboration, we accept that we are peers and colleagues. We learn how the other works, what they value, what their perspective is, what drives it, what their goals are and their concerns and their expectations. And we value these differences. We want to know these differences. We don't just tolerate them, because these differences need to be integrated with our differences. Secondly, we clarify everybody's expectations. We define our roles and tasks. We define our common terms and language. And that will make it far easier to agree on our priorities and to set a timeline. And most importantly, we establish a process for resolving conflict, because there will be conflict. And conflict that is resolved rather than ignored or pushed aside actually creates the best solutions, and it builds a stronger team, and it establishes buy-in, which is very important in a big change like this. So with the framework, collaboration is how IL instruction happens, and the classroom is where IL is learned. All right, second question. How are you assessing these information literacy classroom experiences? Well, clearly a classroom instructor can't use the same criteria that many libraries use to document their IL work. The number of BI sessions, the number of reference hours or interviews, the number of LibGuides or other resources created, and so on. Products like Credo have more sophisticated measurement features, but they won't tell you what students are learning about IL in the classroom or in a discipline, or how they are progressing toward IL competency. So if IL is to be taught as a core competency, then true classroom assessment at appropriate places in the general education curriculum needs to be done, and done as it is for everything that's taught in the classroom, no matter what the subject. To be meaningful, assessment has to be linked to the student learning outcomes for that classroom or course. So if a psychology program, for example, wants to know if the psychology graduate has achieved IL competency in their discipline, then their classroom IL experiences need to be systematically implemented through the life of the student's academic program, with predetermined assessment points for measuring progress. Note that it is student-centric. Assessment measures the student, not the department library. In other words, information literacy assessment needs to be mainstreamed into the assessment cycle for an overall institutional education plan. As mentioned in the first question, education is assessed from student learning outcomes, and student learning outcomes are the building blocks of the assessment process. As some of you may know who teach courses, it's a four-step process. First, you plan. What do you want your student to know? What is your student learning outcome? Second, you assess that, meaning you create an assessment instrument to measure that SLO, such as an assignment or a test. Third, you compile your data and you analyze that assessment. What does it tell you about what the student learned or didn't learn? And lastly, you improve. Based on the assessment, how are you going to change what you teach? In higher education, student learning outcomes are created by and large through the departments and the programs, not the individual instructor, which means they're set. And they do that through faculty governance. So for classroom assessment in IL, you'll need to work with what's already in place at the moment, and then work through the slow process of curricular development to get any changes needed. Student learning outcomes are built largely from Bloom's taxonomy for teaching and learning and assessment, consisting of 6 categories of cognitive processes in ascending order. Down at the bottom is remembering, then they move to understanding, then applying, analyzing, evaluating, and finally at the very top, actually creating or synthesizing new information. Using these categories, student learning outcomes are written in action verbs to show what they do. They define, they create, they interpret, they organize, they construct. Learning is further measured with rubrics that categorize a student's competency in a subject from emerging to expert or similar words, and you'll see that used in the framework. For example, a student learning outcome at a lower level course might expect the student to be able to define the main terms, but at a higher level course, the student will be required to construct a new theory, perhaps. How well the student performs that task of defining or constructing that theory determines whether they are emerging or expert or somewhere in between. In our book, we have proposed student learning outcomes for all 83 dispositions and knowledge practices in the framework. Each frame has a certain number of dispositions or ways of thinking, matters of the heart, right? Is that what you say? Yes. And knowledge practices, which are called in our book matters of the head? Mind is on the mind, sorry. With the idea that a classroom instructor in collaboration with a librarian would choose one of these and adapt it in their course for a given assignment. Because the classroom instructor knows his or her course and its learning outcomes and is most familiar with the cognitive processes here involved in mastering the coursework, he or she is in a very good position to choose that knowledge practice or disposition that most closely resonates with the goals of the course. And because he or she also knows the curriculum and created the syllabus and the assignments, he probably has a pretty good idea about what assignment or learning activity may best fit that assessment tool. So in reality, truly, the classroom instructor brings a lot of expertise to that IL collaboration. There are other ways to assess information literacy, such as online tutorials or even credit courses, but to be useful assessment tools, they need to be constructed in the same way that all assessment in education is done, evaluating what a student has learned through the consistent use of well-crafted, truly quantifiable student learning outcomes measured through the learning activities. Okay, last question. I'm running out of voice. What is your plan for teaching the information literacy framework concepts on your campus? For this question, there are 3 keywords to focus on: plan, concepts, and campus. Many, if not all of you, have worked on plans for teaching information literacy as structured by the old standards because they were skills-based, and these skills were directly related to library resources. Your information literacy instruction plan was highly library-centric. Basically, the student was learning how the database is operated, what criteria was used for reliability, and how the information was stored. They were learning about how to understand the media that is used to store and deliver information. But what about the rest of the information world? What happens after the student graduates and becomes a working adult, a consumer, a voter, a participant in their community? Would those library skills translate into the rest of the information universe outside the library? The creators of the framework realized that the answer was probably no. At the same time, accreditation agencies were defining information literacy as one of several core competencies, like critical thinking, that today's graduates need to achieve success in the world. So what does it mean to be an information literate nurse or a social worker or a physicist? These are questions that your departments are asking because their accreditation agencies are asking them as well. So how do you build a campus-wide information literacy program? In our book, we have a chapter titled Joining the Information Literacy Conversation in Education. It is meant to familiarize yourself with how classroom instructors operate in their job, what their perspectives are on education, on information literacy, and their roles as educators. We have another chapter also that shares tips on how to create a framework campus culture. This is the world you're entering into to sit side by side and creating an information literacy instruction plan that embraces a higher education or general education model. Here are some suggestions from our book in no particular order, drawn from those, actually a lot of the book, several chapters, not just those 2. Okay, the first thing to do is meet with faculty or departments to discuss information literacy in general. Make a few resources that you can share that are discipline specific. Set up focus groups to discuss these resources, or join committees that are tasked with addressing the integration of information literacy instruction into the coursework. Ask to attend your department meetings. Consider adding a faculty outreach librarian, or make faculty outreach part of a librarian's job. This person would set up brown bag lunches or send out emails or newsletters and so on, all in the name of information literacy. Some institutions have housed a librarian within the department itself, making that librarian part of the department to help them with their information literacy instruction needs. Start with people that you already have good relationships with, that you've already been down the road a ways. Work on incremental change, construct collaborations as phased processes. Keep track of your accomplishments so they can be noted and celebrated and used to entice other faculty to join the information literacy party. Nothing succeeds like success, but you have to tell people about your successes, otherwise they won't know. If you are a specialist or a liaison, become familiar with your department's timeline for assigning classes and performing curriculum and program review. Contact new faculty and those teaching new courses to get in on the ground floor when they're creating their syllabi, when they're creating their assignments. Become familiar with the educational issues and language of curriculum development and ask open-ended questions about what the department is doing. All of these things demonstrate that you are willing to work alongside them and let the Wookiee win. Because become familiar with the processes of faculty governance to learn what is doable with the resources you have, with the resources they have, and the other constraints you have to deal with, such as time. Nobody has enough time. Learn about the assessment process within the disciplines and their timelines so you can figure out where to fit in IL assessment. Be proactive, but let the administrators lead. Let the Wookiees win. Finally, one last tip. There's certainly more in the book, but I'm at the end of my segment. So just as important about learning the cultures of other disciplines, remember to evaluate your own library culture to identify its strengths in collaboration, as well as its weaknesses. Be proactive in developing your collaborative skills for yourself, as well as for your staff. And don't simply require people to read resources or go to a workshop. Assess those as well. Make sure that they're being effective. Okay, now Dave is going to take over to do another one-question poll based on these first 3 questions. Dave?
All right, okay. Thank you, Janice, for that great summary for answering those 3 different questions. Many things, of course, that we address in our book. Okay, so go ahead and try to click on one of these. What are there? There's 6 different buttons that you could click. In planning my information literacy instruction program, my next steps after this webinar likely will be what? Okay, all right, so we've got quite a few, starting at least with meeting with faculty and other librarians, begin to collaborate, brainstorm to create a plan. That seems to be a favorite. Not a favorite is participate in more events like this one. Okay. Well, I haven't talked yet, so maybe you'll get a different answer for that one. Okay, great. Thank you very much. And we'll move on now with the next part of our with the webinar on question 4. All right. How are you incorporating the framework concepts in your one-shot instruction? Okay, so, many of us know some of this. Since 2000 and before, one-shots, as they have come to be known in our profession, were created in the context of a how-to, skills-based environment. Typically, a classroom faculty member will contact the librarian to come teach their students how to find relevant scholarly resources for a research assignment using the library's online databases, period. The framework, however, was intentionally created to not be overtly skills-based, but to be more conceptually based. The frames of the framework are composed of 6 categories of, quote, big ideas, each beginning with a short description, then a longer one, followed by a dozen or so goal-like knowledge practices and dispositions that Janice has already alluded to. So the question is, how can librarians faithfully teach the framework concepts while at the same time imparting students with the basics of finding relevant sources? Well, during this period of ongoing change that we're living in, the traditional one-shot bibliographic instruction will continue to play an important role. I think we all agree with that. However, as the framework for information literacy becomes a much larger conversation on our campuses, the one-shot, although continuing, will make up a smaller part of the whole than it did in the past. In a thoughtful IL plan, one-shots can be executed within the big ideas found in, for example, the frame Searching as Strategic Exploration. And the question is, well, how do you do that? Well, first, in preparation for a one-shot, you, the librarian, can reflect on 3 things that are found in this one frame. Number 1 is its descriptions. The second is its knowledge practices. And third, its dispositions. You then find one concept, one idea to weave into the one-shot instruction. For example, in the frame that we're talking about, searching as strategic exploration, the shorter description reads, searching for information is often nonlinear and iterative, requiring the evaluation of a range of information sources and the mental flexibility to pursue alternate avenues as new understandings develops. Now, if we were to rephrase that, it can mean something like maybe it's okay for students to think critically outside the box when it comes to locating relevant resources. Second, let's look at the first knowledge practice for searching as strategic exploration. That states, quote, learners who are developing their information literate abilities determine the initial scope of the task required to meet their information needs. Now, if we were to take that knowledge practice and rephrase it, you might say something like, students need to study well an assignment's requirements. And if there's a rubric, have that rubric in front of them as they begin to search the resources. In this slide, we see an example of an assignment that you might find in a biology class. So as you go about teaching your BI, you sprinkle it with these 2 rephrased ideas. As an example, you set time to, first of all, you want to make sure that you're setting time to collaborate with the course's professor by phone or face-to-face to share a few thoughts about the framework, to share about your goal, to use these 2 ideas from one of the frames and how you plan to implement these ideas in the one shot. You ask the faculty member for their input, and as appropriate, you add any ideas suggested by that faculty member. Explain parts of the assignment that relate to the frame's big ideas. So here you are in the classroom teaching at this time with the students. So you might point out such things as you need a minimum of 3 references, as you can read in this assignment. Those are not to come from the textbook. And if you look at the bottom part of this slide, I've highlighted the parts of the percents that will go toward the grade. And if you add those up, you can pretty much say that 60% of the assignment's grades could relate to how well you as a student can do the search. Since you've already collaborated this approach with the instructor, there's no second guessing on what the intent of the assignment is. Then you get next, what I do at least, you get a student volunteer to come up to the computer with you, and you ask if she or he has chosen a topic, and you use that on the spot as an example. If there's no topic, then you certainly have one ready to go. So you facilitate the student step by step in the context of this frame. How the strategy yields the 3 required references, for example. And if time allows, you ask 1 or more students to come up and you do the same thing. Make sure that you're using the students' names and you let the class show their appreciation by giving them a hand at the end. In this way, you're incorporating big ideas from the framework and still instructing on how-to skills that the students, as we all know, desperately need. Now, going on to the next question, question number 5, how are you assessing your IL benchmarks? For the former standards, there were 5 of them, as some of us know. The benchmarks were rather clear because of the nature and the structure of the standards themselves. Here's what Standard 2 looked like. It has a descriptive heading followed by a performance indicator and then a series of outcomes. This fairly prescriptive approach provided common data for benchmark assessment, even to the point that evaluation could have been achieved at a national level with standardized measurable benchmarks. Turning to the nature of the structure of the framework, the clear intent has been not to create a set of new standards that were prescriptive student learning outcomes. Instead, the approach was for each campus to create their own tailor-made IL student learning outcomes based on a conceptually based model. So, for example, let's look at the frame research as inquiry. All right, it's kind of long. I know the print is very small, but just to get an idea of the contrast between that and the standards. It has 5 parts to it. The first thing is a distinct title, here, Research as Inquiry. It has a concise description. Here, that description says research is iterative and depends upon asking increasingly complex or new questions whose answers in turn develop additional questions or lines of inquiry in any field. Okay, so this is then followed by a third part, a more fuller description, which among other things contrasts experts versus novice learners. And that's true in all 6 of the frames. And then next are, the fourth item, are about a half a dozen what we have referred to as knowledge practices. And I like to mention those, use something a little more colloquial, that these are goals, mind goals. And then lastly are the half dozen or so dispositions. And again, I like to refer to those as heart goals. For each of these very thoughtful parts, not one of them can be considered as a real student learning outcome. Why? Because as I stated, the originators of the framework wanted individual institutions to tailor-make their own measurable IL benchmarks. In that way, such SLOs would be more connected to one's own campus culture. They'd be more discipline focused. And especially, they'd be more in line with the university or the college at your college's institutional strategic goals and priorities. In this way, there is an intentional process designed to build information literate biologists, accountants, and teachers, etc. This does not work if done by librarians only. That is no longer an option. It's workable as a collaborative model between classroom faculty and librarians. The framework was never designed to be accomplished by librarians alone. In our book, we try to facilitate this process. In chapters 8 and 9, we have taken each of the 83 knowledge practices and dispositions, and we have come up with 83 sample student learning outcomes. For example, in this slide is taken from the book section on sample SLOs for the framework Research as Inquiry. The original knowledge practice is on the right-hand side of your screen. Synthesize ideas gathered from multiple sources, and the sample SLO is on the left-hand side. Locate, access, evaluate, and synthesize new information from diverse sources, from multiple perspectives and multiple media, both formal and informal. Effectively compare and contrast their accuracy and their relevancy. Then for each of the based on one IL SLO, we created a one-page ready-to-use framework-based assignment built on one of the 6 specific disciplines that we've chosen, with also a ready-to-use matching rubric. For the Research as Inquiry example, this is what the assignment that we have in the book looks like. Kind of hard to see that one too. And then that's followed up with a rubric. And so this is what that rubric looks like. To more easily facilitate practical, no-hassle use of we've also developed a website of all of the assignments, all of the rubrics, and much, much more in PDF and flexible Word versions so that you as educators, both librarians and classroom faculty, can easily copy the samples and add any accommodating changes to make them work for their class, for campuses, for your campus benchmarking, and for your campus's assessment needs. Okay, now let's move on to the sixth and final question and answering that. How can an IL resource like Credo help expedite the teaching of the IL frames on your campus? The job of implementing ACRL's framework on campus is helped significantly in partnerships between librarians, classroom faculty, administrators such as the Writing Center director, and professional third parties like Springshell's LibGuides that we all have on our website, or the sponsor of this webinar, Credo Reference. As an example, I'll highlight 3 experiences our library has had in working with Credo, in Credo's information literacy products. The first one is a student-centered interactive research tool. The second thing is Credo's standards-based video tutorials and text guides. And then finally, third, a series of customized video tutorials. Okay, so the first one, an interactive student research tool. In 2015, after working with the Department of English on our campus, our IL committee worked with Credo designers to construct a step-by-step online application that walks freshman writing students through clarifying their topic, creating a research question, and finding relevant online resources, and sending a final document of all of that, all their citations, all their notes, to their email. Very, very helpful. Here's a screen capture in the middle of a session showing our institutional brand, up in the upper right-hand corner, a review of some important resource distinctions. As you can see, we're looking at the difference between primary, secondary, and tertiary. And then finally, third, a space where the student creates citations and types notes after accessing the library's databases. In one-shots, when I do this, I simply demonstrate this app with a student's topic. Okay, second are a set of available standards-based video tutorials and text guides that Credo has put together. They have a rich selection of comprehensive student-targeted videos and text-based tutorials that are enjoyable to engage with. They're short, they're under 5 minutes, and they're tied to an array of old and current standards, including the framework, as you can see in this next slide. Finally, third, our university's experience, our information literacy committee's experience with Credo was with a set of customized video tutorials. We contracted with Credo to work with us on co-designing a couple of video tutorials highlighting aspects of our information literacy implementation on our campus. Each are about 4 minutes long. One is in our library catalog, about our library catalog. Another is on using an EBSCOhost database. And we have a third that's just now coming out of production that is on taking students, hear this out, taking students from using Google, because that's what they're going to use anyways, to using Wikipedia, to using Google Scholar, finally to be using our online databases. And this is something right out of our book. And the fourth tutorial that we're working on, that we're still working on here at our campus, is in the design stage, to be made for our faculty members only, to bring them on board with the framework, which I think is a pretty forward-thinking way of implementing the framework, is focusing on just the faculty alone. I can't say enough about the gold standard professionalism of the project strategy manager and the creative instructional design team of Credo. They have given us 100% support and access to the entire process, down to the exact script used in the final product. This next screen shows the amount of back and forth between Credo designers and our IL committee as we work together, as we are continuing, as we did work together on the third tutorial. So in summary, Credo is one of many third-party partners that can stretch our resource efforts towards implementing the framework on your campus. For us, this has been true with Credo in the areas of an interactive research tool for students to use. Second, Credo's standards-based videos and text guides. And third, our experience in co-creating customized video tutorials. All these tools and resources help our end users engage in information literacy learning experiences. Okay, finally, we're going to take a third poll. And as you can read, this third poll, we're asking, after reflecting on these last 3 points that I just shared, where are you right now?
Ooh.
Okay, we're waiting and see what happens here. Okay, we note that we have some work ahead. Not too many of us are, or none of us are shell-shocked. That's good to know.
That's good. That's great.
All right, great. All right, that's wonderful. Thank you very much for taking the time to fill those out. Again, here is the order information to request our book on implementing the information literacy framework on your campus. And as I shared later, Roman and Littlefield is graciously giving a 30% discount for those of you who are attending today's webinar. All right, now we're going to take some time with what we have left for some Q&A. And also, for those of you who have been typing any questions, I think we're going to be looking at some of that as well.
I'm going to close that out so you can see the questions. No, the script. Oh, you know what you're doing. Never mind.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions? Hi, Henrietta.
I'm looking at the chat box to see if we have any. I don't see any so far. I hope folks are not just being shell-shocked, as you said. Please do type in the chat box there where you told us what part of the country you were in. Jump back in and type some questions for our presenters if you like. In the meantime, I have a few questions. Okay. I was thinking, if you were, say, a library that at the moment is doing one-shot sessions and wants to get into the deep end of collaboration like you described, what's the time commitment involved? Like, when could someone expect to really have a collaborative, rich class up and running?
Okay. All right. If you're just starting out, that it's very important to be incremental. It's very important to create a realistic timeline. If you're just starting out, then what's a bite-sized thing to start with? You go to your department that you're strongest with, and then you move forward on that.
Right. You know, in our book, we have a number of scenarios, let's call them, actual conversations that we have had on our campus, or something that we are saying that is really likely to happen between for our campus librarians, academic librarians, and the classroom faculty. And there's one in particular I love, and that is where a classroom faculty and an academic librarian are regularly getting together over lunch and discussing our book. All right? There's a lot of very practical things in the book, a lot of steps, a lot of how-tos, a lot of materials that are ready to go. You can make a copy of it and just take it right into class along with a rubric so you can measure it immediately. Like I mentioned, we have some materials. All this material, all the same materials are on our website. Half of them are put together in a Word document, so you can take that and you can change anything in the document to make it fit your particular course, your classwork, and then have students fill that out. And it comes, as I've mentioned, also with these rubrics. Again, those can be changed up however you want. But a lot of the heavy lifting for implementing information literacy, we hope, the 4 years we invested in this, are in the book and the website, so that saves you, the librarian, and hopefully those of your close colleagues that are classroom faculty to use on your campus and see it really actually becoming more implemented. I would say and add to the remarks that Janice has given that, it takes time, obviously, Henrietta, to make a commitment with somebody on trying to implement a new idea into one's classroom. The faculty, as Janice has already shared, already have enough content to cover in their class. Thank you very much. And so to ask them to do more is going to be tough. It's going to be hard. We know that going in. Many faculty that allow you to come in for, say, a 50-minute BI, a 50-minute discussion about how to use the databases, a one-shot we call it, they already are giving up quite a bit of time to let that happen. We hope that you can also be somewhat creative in doing some of this work outside of the classroom time. And that can be done through these video tutorials where students will go through those tutorials. And I didn't mention this, but at the end of each of Credo's video tutorials, we have 4 of them that as I mentioned, we're working with. They have a quiz that's been created explicitly for that video. And that data that comes from those quiz answers that students will be filling out can be put together and used for improving your information literacy plan on campus, and also for putting together as a group of data for working with information literacy answers to accreditation reports. So there are some things that you don't have to actually do in a classroom setting. To take the time of the faculty member, but certainly it's still valid.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Henrietta.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me just jump in with another question because we don't have that much time left. It is actually from my colleague Amanda, and she asks you. She asks you to speak a little about some of the measurable learning outcomes for each of the dispositions.
We don't have them in front of us. So, yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question. What specifically? Can you give us a little more detail? I mean, they're all laid out in the book, but we obviously haven't got them memorized, and we don't have the book with us. Okay. So,
come on, you don't know it by heart. Well, Amanda,
I can only do 7 years.
I understand what she's asking.
Yeah.
What we did to make the dispositions measurable, technically, I believe we took about 6 of them out of the 80. Well, approximately half of the 83 are dispositions, and the other half are knowledge practices. And so there's about 6 of them that we, in the book, talk about and give specific ideas for student learning outcome in the narrative.
Yeah, give scenarios. We give scenarios. Yeah. We give 6 scenarios.
We actually have a total of 12.
12 scenarios.
12 scenarios. And at the end of those scenarios, 12 of those scenarios, we do put together a student learning outcome for only one of either the knowledge practices or the dispositions. However, we have 6 charts that give a a student learning outcome for all 83.
For each.
And I think that's what she was getting at. And she, I think I can, if you give me a moment, maybe you can have another question asked. I can actually bring
We
up
have 5 minutes.
and go through a couple of those.
Yeah. In other words, we have case studies for 6 of them, or 12 of them, in the book.
Well, could you? I don't think we have time to really read it on the screen. But could you give us the bare bones of one of the scenarios?
Yeah.
I can give you a bare bones.
Yeah.
There's one that we have where a librarian has been doing BIs for a department for, say, 10 years, all right? And now we're trying to roll out a campus-wide effort in information literacy. And in this particular case, we're taking it by this whole department. There's one class in this department that all the students that are in that major have to take. And so we end up arranging a time off campus at a venue where all the faculty come that teach that class, as well as the adjuncts that teach that class. Let's say most of these classes are taught face-to-face, although this could work just as well for online, and we just do the training in an online environment. And so it's during that time that we take one assignment in that course that we have chosen ahead of time with the main person who actually created the course. And we try to, start the conversation ahead of time with one of the 12 possible assignments that we've already created. And in this particular example, the assignment is already finished, it's already completed, along with a rubric. But in the scenario, it's not completed yet, if you get my gist. So that there's this opportunity for faculty to give input so that when we're done, we now have a legitimately co-collaborated effort with as many of the faculty as we can get together on this one assignment that now has a rubric with it that students will be graded on. The faculty member grades it and has data that they now can use to not only grade the student, of course, but also to have data that can be used for other reports, accreditations, and et cetera, things like that. So that's one of the 12 in a nutshell that we've created.
Thank you. That was a nutshell. We have one last question. It is from our audience member, Karen Heffernan, and she asks, we have a large online program, 10,000 students, and courses are designed in a process involving subject matter experts, course designers, and learning resource personnel. Many of the ideas suggested involve personal connections with faculty designing courses. Do you have suggestions for collaborating online with such a course design process?
Well, that's a really good question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Karen just pointed out to me that I said it was 10,000 students. It's 100,000.
100,000.
Wow.
Oh, only 100,000. Well, yeah, we have a number of online courses. We probably have a total of probably 4,000 online students. Sure, good question. I would try to use something like the technology we're using right now to bring all of those important faculty together that can also feel like they're speaking into different things that we can do to implement information literacy. Of course, the goal that we have in the book and for our campus, and therefore we're hoping that many campuses will embrace this idea, is to choose one assignment that's already been done from every course that's been created and new courses to come. So what we would do is this: we would sit down with the faculty member, we would have their syllabus in front of us, we'd have their assignments in front of us all, and then we would look at the 6 frames. All right, the 6 frames are not intuitive, so I have created in the book, in the appendices, a series of memory cards, if you will, flashcards that fit on the back of business cards, which includes the title of each of the 6 frames and the short definition. Then we look at these together and we try to determine which of these 6 would easily fit into the domain of your class, maybe even the domain of your discipline, then your class. Then you go from there to look at that explicit frame. Okay, you look at that particular frame, you look at the longer definition of that frame, and then you look into the dispositions and the knowledge practices with our book open to those ideas of student learning outcomes for each of those. So then you have the faculty looking at those and trying to determine which of those would make a good SLO, and then from that, looking at the 12 examples that we have in general of all of the assignments that we've created to then also choose that to go into that curriculum. And you could do that all in an online book.
And here's the thing, when you have that, see, I can tell, I get the sense that they're saying, oh, where are we going to come up with ideas? Here's the thing, when you open up those dispositions and knowledge practices to the classroom faculty, something will resonate with them. They will look at those and they will say, this is it. And that's what you have to go in with, that expectation. They will find what they want and what they think they can use. So you don't need to do all the work. You just go in and you open it all up for them and they will find something and run with it.
I'm sorry, I know we're out of time, but the nature of the framework is much more friendly to academic classroom faculty than academic librarians, because so much of the framework has been built on much of the what has already been true in liberal education.
Yeah.
So this will resonate. The words themselves will resonate with just about every discipline within a campus environment. It's interesting how that's been put together.
Yeah. Particularly in the humanities, this will really resonate with classes in the humanities.
Well, I'm afraid I will have to cut off the conversation there, but it doesn't have to end, because I hope our audience will join us in the learning community afterwards, and I hope you, Dave and Jan, will be able to join us there too to further discuss all these ideas and tips. Librarians can also find in there resources to use in your information literacy work, and you can also start your own threads if you have a topic that you're struggling with, or something that's going on to do with IL. Please do bring it up in the community and get some help there. And for now, I would like to say thank you very much to our co-presenters. That was a really informative program, and we appreciate it so much.
Thank you again for everyone for listening and participating, and for those who are going to be watching this 100 times afterwards.